Welcome to another edition of the Mail Time Podcast. I am joined today by Nora Lewis and Juan Michelen, who are part of the legal defense team for Ohad Fisherman, the formerly accused Ohad Fisherman. I might add, they did an amazing job. Nora has her own practice, Lewis Legal, PLLC, and Juan is an associate at Stumphauser, Kolaya, Nadler, and Sloman. Just to set the stage here, I want to share a little bit of a clip from what was presented when Ohad Fisherman was first accused.
Ohad Fisherman had been holding her down as the Alexander brothers, both of them, raped the victim.
How do we go from that to now Ohad Fisherman has the case dismissed the day before the trial?
That's a great question. And how we start there is when you have a prosecutor's office who is more interested in setting up that press conference so that they can be involved in the greater press that was happening about the Alexander brothers than actually doing their job to investigate a case. At the moment that the state attorney of the entire county stood up on that stage in her press conference and said those words, they had done a total of 89 minutes of investigation. And that 89 minutes was 4 interviews with the alleged victim and 2 of her sisters and a friend. So they hadn't done any investigation. And I understand it was an 8-year-old case. And a lot of what they said is, well, you can't get stuff. There are things you can get. You can verify anything anybody said. You can get a receipt. You can get surveillance video. You can do police work. But they didn't do it. What they wanted to do was get on that stage and have a big flashy announcement. And that's why that press release and that video made the news. It made national news, and it put Miami in with what was happening in New York. So how we get there from here, frankly, is not a lot of steps other than the defense doing the investigation the police should have done from the beginning.
And I want to add that there was a civil complaint filed in New York, I believe, with the assistance of Morgan & Morgan,
Yes.
which you might see advertised on the side of a bus or at a sports game. And in this, there's very explicit allegations against Ohad Fisherman. He's accused of pinning. Fisherman grabbed plaintiff from behind and pinned her shoulders while Oren forcibly, there's language I'm not going to use, but R-worded the plaintiff, ignoring plaintiff's tears and pleas for him to stop. Juan, just for those who weren't following it completely closely, who was Ohad Fisherman before this case was opened by the state of Florida?
Who he was, I mean, he was a normal guy, the same guy he still is today, right? He was just a realtor. Before that, he had a hummus business, just a regular guy. What's interesting about that civil complaint, I know you've noticed, Ohad is not sued in that civil complaint, even though they make the same allegations they make in the criminal case in terms of his involvement. You would think Ohad would have been sued. We racked our brains trying to figure out why didn't they sue Ohad then? You know, it should not or cannot be a jurisdictional issue because at the time, all these people lived in New York, right? So the accuser lived in New York, Alon Alexander lived in New York, pretty sure Oren also lived in New York and Ohad lived in New York. So it's not a jurisdictional reason why you can think about it all you want and then you kind of come down on, well, the Alexander brothers are very wealthy, right? So that's kind of the only difference and the only thing I can think of for why they would not also include Ohad in that civil complaint, which was filed again the day after the arrests were done here in Miami, the day after this press conference he just aired. So it was all clearly coordinated with Morgan & Morgan for splashy headlines for big effect, I think.
And I want to give a shout out to Jeffrey Sloman, who you worked with on this case as well. He received a phone call from Ohad Fisherman. Is that correct, Juan? He received a phone call. Ohad was on his honeymoon in Japan.
That's and I believe it was the next day or the day of. It was either December 11th, December 12th. I remember when Jeff called me saying Ohad had called him. So yeah, Ohad called us within hours from Japan. He had arrived there, I think, the day before, and immediately they started making plans to come back to Miami, and they did. They flew through New York and then into Miami, and he was here within days. of the arrest warrants being issued. Despite, and here's the interesting thing, the state knew about that, right? Obviously they knew about that. They knew that he was going to turn himself in, yet, and they knew this because Jeff had told them, yet they still, as you saw in that press conference, have this at-large poster as if they have no idea where he is. It's just very salacious headlines, and you can tell that's what they were going for.
And had Ohad ever been approached about this case? This allegedly happened in 2016. Did Ohad have any interaction with this person? Did Ohad even know this person?
No. Not that he can at least imagine if you can remember who you met 8 years ago. Even the accuser herself claims that her interactions with this cousin, which obviously we all know Ohad is not the Alexander brothers' cousin, but that's how the press ran with it because the accuser claimed that this guy was a cousin. But even if you believe her story, she says she only interacted with the cousin once in her life for a period of about an hour. Never saw him before, never saw him afterward. So yeah, I mean, it's a very far-fetched and difficult to wrap your mind around how we got to even this, how we're even here today. It's kind of crazy.
So Nora, as a defense attorney, how do you approach a case like this in which there is no evidence and you're dealing with allegations from almost a decade prior? How does someone reasonably defend themselves?
Well, I mean, I think what a lot of people forget, but then if you get selected to be on a jury, I will remind you about as many times as I can, is people are innocent until proven guilty. Harder, right, with any sort of sex charge or allegation for people to understand that. But Ohad was innocent the whole time. He would have been innocent as he sat through that trial, and he's innocent unless the state can prove beyond and to the exclusion of every reasonable doubt that he is in fact guilty of these charges. Step one is, why did they even arrest him, right? Like, what do we have? What got them to arrest him? And based on the very scant police reports we had, it is based on the say-so of this alleged victim. So step one is, well, obviously speaking to our client to see if he remembers what he did 8 years ago, but quite honestly, like Juan said, I don't know what I was doing 8 years ago, even on New Year's, because remember, the allegation is not, as the ball is dropping, we can all remember maybe where we were when we rang in the new year, but where we were at 6 p.m. in the afternoon, not a clue. I barely remember what I did yesterday. But it's also assessing what the prosecution's evidence is. And so that's why, the very first thing we did was start taking these depositions, because that was very important. What is this woman even saying? Normally state depositions and criminal depositions, unlike, civil stuff sometimes, they tend to maybe be a few hours, maybe a day. The depositions of the alleged victim in this case, 6 days. 6 days. I'm literally sitting next to over 1,000 pages of deposition transcripts still on my desk because, we're ready to go to trial, because her story was so wild as it changed from not only about what happened that night, but also how it came about that she was reporting this now 8 years later. And what we learned.
And what did you find?
Well, yeah. So what we learned, a couple of things, right? Her other witnesses are the sister and the friend saying, oh, she told us that evening, right? But remember, it's the defense attorneys who found out, because she never tells the police, she never tells the prosecution, the defense attorneys who found out that not even 3 hours after this alleged violent gang assault, they went out clubbing. They didn't go out to a New Year's Eve at someone's backyard. It wasn't a somber evening. They were at Live at the Fontainebleau to see Justin Bieber. Think about that. They all got showered, dressed, made up, hair done. They got into an Uber. They went down there. They waded through the crowds. They went up to the bars and got drinks, and then took a bunch of photos, smiling, dancing, singing along, right? 2.5 hours afterwards. And that was evidence that, but for the work we did, wouldn't have existed. And again, the police didn't get. So that's 2016. We also find out in the course of our investigation and taking these depositions, there is not a single documented instance of anybody in the alleged victim's life, herself, or anybody in her life talking about this incident. they all knew since 2016. Not a single person in her family said, hey, checking in on you. How are you doing? Hey, I found this assault support group. Maybe you should join. Not a single documented piece of evidence. The first thing we have is her sister, who we learned through depositions, knew that she was hooking up with Alon in 2016 and did not like him. So her sister sends her an article saying, hey, those dudes are getting sued. And what else did we learn? The alleged victim. She just lost her job and she'd moved in with her mom. There's a massive lawsuit going on. And what is the first documented time she reports this incident? She didn't go to the police. She doesn't go to a prosecutor's office. She doesn't go to a rape treatment center. She calls up the same lawyer in that article and says, hi, I'd like to be involved in the lawsuit. And when he goes, I'm not taking your case, she calls Morgan and Morgan. Billions recovered for clients. That is the first time documented she's reporting this. And she doesn't, and that's in June of 2024. She does not walk in to the police department until October. So she has months working out what her case is with a civil lawyer, the same civil lawyer who walks into the police station with her, hand in hand, and who turns around and files that lawsuit the day after the guys are arrested. So
is that normal? Is that normal to go into a police station with a civil attorney?
Juan, you want to take that one?
That's an easy one. No. Even the detective in this case, lead detective, 19 years experience, said that was the first time he ever had a civil attorney come in with an alleged victim. And here's the thing, kind of just piggybacking off of what Nora was saying. Everything Nora said is 100% true. The depositions were devastating for them because they just kept contradicting each other and showing that this was clearly a manufactured case that began with the accuser and Morgan & Morgan in the summer of 2024. But here's kind of where, at least in my mind, where the real injustice lies. And it's that the state could theoretically say, well, the defense lawyers did such great work during their depositions that is how we realized that this case was weak, that this case was, this accuser was lying, the sisters were lying, right? They could conceivably make that claim. The problem they have if they try to make that claim is that the inconsistencies didn't start with the depositions, right? So like Nora mentioned, 89 minutes of investigation, those 89 minutes were 37 minutes interviewing the accuser, 25 minutes interviewing one of the sisters, 14 minutes interviewing the other sister, 13 minutes interviewing the friend. And within those 4 police interviews that occurred between October 8th, 2024 and October 30th, 2024, the sisters themselves to the police detective contradicted each other. And to the point where when we deposed the lead detective, he acknowledged that he noticed these inconsistencies and spoke about them with the prosecutor. And that meeting was on, I believe, November 6th, right? So they do interviews on October 8th, October 22nd, and then 2 on October 30th. On November 6th, the lead detective meets with the prosecutor and points out all of these inconsistencies. And his next email, which I would encourage anyone who wants to figure out what's going on in Florida, Chapter 119, public record requests here are amazing, because then when you get the emails between, or the text messages between the lead detective and the prosecutor, you see that, and you see emails between him copying the prosecutor to his sergeant saying, yeah, in the meeting yesterday, they were telling us they're planning the press conference already. And that was November 6th. And what are these inconsistencies that weren't big enough to stop this investigation right there or the arrests? One, you have one of the sisters out of nowhere, completely out of nowhere, because the accuser herself doesn't claim this. One of the sisters just throws in, yeah, the cousin masturbated on her. Where did that come from? No, not even the accuser herself said that, but she just kind of threw that in there. The other sister said, my understanding of what my sister told me is the cousin wasn't involved at all, right? So you have 2 sisters, one of them saying he masturbates on her, the other one's like, he didn't do anything, right? They weren't sure about where she went. Some of them were like, she went to a pool party, others a barbecue. They all agree, right, that when she got back, she never said the name Ohad Fisherman. They never remember when she said the name Ohad Fisherman. Most of them didn't even know the name Ohad Fisherman. Yet she walks in 8 years later, very confidently saying, this guy, the third guy, I know who it is, it's Ohad Fisherman. And another thing the lead detective fails to mention anywhere, and maybe it's in part not his fault because no one told him, is that when she did a photo lineup on October 16th, which was recorded, and you can see it, it's all public records requests, she identifies someone else first. She identifies someone else.
Can I ask a question? And excuse me if it's really a dumb question, but as someone who's kind of ignorant about some of this stuff, why wouldn't the police speak to Ohad Fisherman?
Because
is that a normal procedure, Juan?
They could have. They would say, I think, we didn't want him to flee or something like that. We don't want to let him on in case we need to do warrants, which they never did. But they didn't want to give him a heads up. But it is crazy that the detective that ran the lineup never told the lead detective she identified someone else first. So that doesn't make it into any report to this day. They never even supplemented a report to say she identified someone else. And most importantly, the judge that signed the warrant for Ohad's arrest was never informed that the accuser had picked someone else first, which I imagine would have affected whether or not they were willing to issue a warrant. So those are just a few examples of all the contradictions that the state could have caught before we even got on the case. And they just ignored it.
And Nora, you mentioned in passing that the accuser had actually had a previous sexual relationship with Alon Alexander?
Yes.
So
yes,
wasn't part of the case was that they said that they were lured to his apartment allegedly, even though Ohad has irrefutable proof that he wasn't even there. But isn't that premise in itself a little bit strange that they were together? Like he could have just invited her innocuously if it even happened.
What we learned, and it's actually sort of even bigger than that, right? So we learned that the prior relationship that the accuser has with Alon is because they had matched on Bumble when they were both in New York. But when she sees his profile on Bumble, she actually knows exactly who he is, even though they had never met before. Because she had been previously hooking up with a friend of Alon's for a couple of years back in Orlando and had seen Alon on this guy's Instagram and then started Googling him, doing background work, researching. And so when Alon comes up on her Bumble, she swipes right because she knows exactly who he is. And they don't immediately meet up, they're chatting. As they're chatting, she never tells him, hey, I know your friend. Actually, we should know each other. We got friends in common. She doesn't tell him. She spends almost a full year chatting with Alon, literally trying to orchestrate meetups, inviting him out, trying to do stuff with him, figuring out where he is from Snapchat or from chats and trying to bump into him in New York. She only hangs out with him twice, and it is just a hookup every time. And she tells us this under oath in the deposition. We know this to be true. She only meets up with him twice, and both times it is for consensual sex. The story she tells about New Year's is that he invites her over to some fake barbecue or pool party, depending on who you talk to, with some photo that doesn't exist, that no one ever saw, and that she alleges she invited one of the friend who was with him on New Year's to join her, but the woman didn't want to go. Think about all of that for a second, right? Like
nothing makes sense. I'm listening to this, and as I've read the case, and I actually wrote over a month ago saying that people owe Ohad an apology because to me it was so egregious, and you have all these contradictions, and it doesn't make any sense. But I've had so many people reach out to me in the last 24 hours since we were posting about it, how petrified they are that something like this could happen to them, in the sense that how do you possibly defend yourself from a situation like this? There's no evidence. Like,
boy, he's frozen.
The more stories, the more details
me.
that go into it. There's just
it's me.
Hundreds
Sorry.
of contradictions. So Juan, what was at the heart of this malpractice in the police station or in the prosecutor's office? Like, how do you get to a point where someone is dragged from their honeymoon as a rapist and there's no evidence?
I think that's a great question. I think it's as simple as like the desire for headlines from the state attorney's office. I think we just lost Nora. I'm sure she'll jump back in. we can see, and again, from the public records requests, we can kind of see how this case starts. And, you have to imagine the context of like where we were back in June of 2024, which is all of a sudden, the brothers are getting sued civilly, not criminal charges, but civil charges. And you have a situation where you're getting, Nora's texting me. You have a situation where,
I'm sure she'll get back on if she can.
yeah, she's asking if the internet died. I'm not sure if
the internet died.
It's more of a question. So I'm not sure if she's asking.
Got it. Well, listen, we'll continue on that until she comes back.
So what happens is, imagine where we were in June 2024. And that's a world where the brothers are getting sued civilly. And there's no criminal charges yet at that point. And they're all over the headlines. You have this, it's a very salacious headline. Identical twin brothers are sexually assaulting everyone around the country, right? And they are very wealthy. So that's kind of the backdrop. Then you have to consider that, at least in some of these allegations, this was happening in Kathy Fernandez-Rundle's own backyard, right? South Beach. And think of what South Beach is, right? South Beach is a place where they need to make sure tourists are not scared to go to, right? So that's you have to kind of understand that context to see, how did we get here? Well, then we get here because, again, the public records request, you see Kathy Rundle is contacted directly. She herself, when I say Kathy Rundle, I don't mean the state attorney's office in general. She herself is contacted by one of these accusers, not this accuser, but one of the accusers. And then you can see in both emails and text threads how it went down the line. And it goes down to then the prosecutor assigned to this case, where she's saying, I was contacted by these accusers, or, obviously she calls them victims. I was contacted by these victims. Kathy Rundle gives her line prosecutor the contact info for these victims. Then we see the text messages between the line prosecutor and the victims, and really one of the victims. That victim then says, I'm going to give you the phone number of the lawyer who's representing a bunch of these girls to see if he can convince them to come forward. Then we see a few days later, that lawyer is contacting the line prosecutor. And you can see that it is quickly developing into a situation where the state attorney's office is pulling cases into their office to prosecute. Then you see a text message from the line prosecutor about a month after this begins to the lead detective, not this lead detective, the lead detective on the other cases. And she tells her, have a new case from you. This is coming directly from KFR, Kathy Fernandez-Rundle. So what ends up happening is when they hear that it's coming directly from KFR, everybody's going to just go along with it. So everybody's just following orders from the top. And next thing you know, you have a detective only doing 89 minutes because that's what he was told. There's text messages between the lead detective and the line prosecutor where the lead detective asks her, is there anything else you want me to do? I just have a few interviews. And is there anything else you want me to do on this case? And the line prosecutor just her only reply is just finish the interviews. That's it. It was just finish the interviews so we could say we did them and get on with the charges. So they
had a predetermined conclusion ahead of time.
I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that he was going to get charged once he was in their sights, for sure.
And something just to add, I think to clarify for those who aren't completely familiar with the case, the Alexander brothers and Ohad were both dealing in not luxury real estate, ultra high-end luxury, the kind that 99.9% of Americans can't even fathom. That's the level that they're dealing with. It's just not regular $2 million house. Okay. So, I mean, I pulled this up from the Wall Street Journal just to talk about the sense of the damage and how crazy this is. About a week or so before he was charged, you actually have the Wall Street Journal features Jay and Jeannie Schottenstein selling their $33.9 million Florida penthouse with Ohad Fisherman of the Fisherman Group. Beautiful. The Wall Street Journal has a digital map of it. It was a full-page printout, the December 6th print edition, so literally days before he goes on his honeymoon and then gets paraded around. How do you possibly get your reputation back after you have just been dragged in the mud?
Nora, you wanna hit that one?
I think in a lot of ways the answer is we don't really know. Step one is doing things like this, because I think something that Juan pointed out yesterday is that but for us having a press conference, but for us going out and talking about this, what we have is all of this press about the charges, not only their press conference, but every time there's a status. And all of that news is he's charged with this charge. He's charged with this charge.
And I don't want to, I don't want to cut you off, but I just have to say, the Real Deal is guilty of this kind of stuff, and all these other salacious journalistic places. The thing that annoys me the most about the Real Deal is that there's very little reporting that goes on. What they're doing is just regurgitating what is said in a complaint. That's not reporting. You're reporting as in quoting something in a complaint and then adding a little bit about what they've done or who their friends are, and then saying, oh, we just reported on this case. That's not reporting on the case. So all of this kind of stuff, and they're running things against Ohad. I mean, we talked about this before. I mean, I wrote about it. Morgan and Morgan literally sponsoring episodes of Law and Crime. I like Jesse Weber personally. I watch a lot of Law and Crime, Jesse Weber. Shout out, Jesse, if you watch this. But it's crazy that you have someone who's promoting the story. Like there's actual episodes in which it was dealing with either the Alexanders or Ohad, and there was sponsored by Morgan and Morgan or one of their affiliates. So like when we talk about journalism, it's not even journalism.
Agreed. I mean, fully agreed. And I think, people love a sexy headline. They love drama. And, the internet is sort of forever. He's been exonerated. Again, had we not done the press conference, the state issues their press release. Nobody reads those things, really. I mean, journalists do, but normal people aren't like, oh, Kathy Fernandez-Rundle put out a press release. Let me read this 2-page document that's kind of dry. And so if you're going to Google his name, the first thing that's going to come up is every article that's been written about the case, is the press conference for when they pressed charges, all of that. So I think step one is us doing things like this because he's exonerated, but it's not over for him. His name.
And of course, I want Ohad to come on if he ever wants to. But I'll say this, like, it's also crazy because the Alexanders still have their federal case, and the prosecutors, for whatever reason, and I know you guys are not their attorneys, but they didn't drop the case against the Alexanders. I don't understand how they don't drop that case. But now, when the Alexander trial, which is supposed to go to trial federally in January of 2026, Ohad is going to be tied in with that by association because these are his friends. These are people he hung out with. He was accused of the same thing of them in Florida. So the damage that the state of Florida did to Ohad, I mean, is there a case for him to sue?
No. Well, this comes up a lot for my clients. I have a lot of clients who they will drop the charges or, we go to trial and we win. And they go, okay, well, how do I get my reputation back? There's a famous quote that Jeff read yesterday in the press conference. And unfortunately, when it comes to the prosecution, and this is the dirty side of this that defense attorneys deal with all the time, they have so much power and they wield it so recklessly. They get to do things like this. They bring criminal charges against somebody. And think about this. They dismissed it the day before. We would have started a jury selection on a case where he was looking at 30 years of state prison for somebody that with evidence the state has had for months. It wasn't about the filing of a notice of alibi. They had the video for months. They sent it to us in discovery. That is why they finally decided to dismiss the case. They've known for months, and they would have gone forward on a trial. So,
and also also the legal fees. The fact that it's 3 extra months or however long since they got all of this stuff, the legal fees, that is not an insignificant amount of money. You guys are honestly, ultra professional.
Yeah, and our time and Ohad's time, at any point they could have ended this nightmare for him. It's unfair to him. We have other clients, and when I go to trial, my clients are my focus. If I'm in trial, that is the only client I'm focused on. So we have a 3-day weekend where all of us spent it in the office, prepping everything. Again, I'm sitting next to 1,000 pages of depositions of the accuser because I was going to be cross-examining her and asking her everything. But no. The one thing I will say also, in terms of Ohad getting his reputation back, I think it's doing this work. It's making sure that when he's Googled, this is what comes up. I also will say, especially as it applies to Ohad, it is going to be community stepping up and reaching out and helping with that, because I think, Ohad's a phenomenal man. He's a good husband. He's going to be a good father. And I think he was very good at what he did. And I think a lot of people know who he is. And I know there's a lot of fear around sort of his association with this case, and considering that the Alexander brothers still have a case open. But this is one of those times I do think people who know him and are in his community do need to step up and sort of undo some of the hurt that's been done so he can rebuild his life, because he can't do that by himself.
I will say that as I began to report on this, I asked no fewer than a dozen people who I had mutual friends between us and Ohad. Every single person couldn't say nicer things about him. And as I started to hear that, I knew something was just really off with what was going on. So I started to push more into it, and it was so out of character. It was completely insane to everyone that this is what the allegations were.
Yeah.
Not to leave you on the sidelines for a second, Juan, but Nora, I just want to ask, or what'd you have to say, Juan?
Well, no, go ahead. I was going to add to what you said about Ohad being a good guy.
Go ahead. I think the world needs to know.
Here's the thing, right? So you're right. Ohad is a really good guy. He's a very nice guy. And when you meet him and then you read what's in these reports, it doesn't match, right? You look at it and you're like, I don't see it. I don't see how this guy could have done that. But, imagine this, right? We get the case the day of the raids, December 11th, December 12th, I think we got the case. It was all brand new. We didn't know Ohad. And, the brothers had already been indicted. A bunch of women came out against the brothers. And now Ohad is public. His name is public, and it's known to the world that at least one woman accused him. We were waiting for the other shoe to drop. We were saying, I guess there's going to be more. Now, when other women see Ohad's name, they're going to say, me too. I was also raped by this guy. Not once. Never. Ohad has never had a traffic ticket. And if there would have been any truth to any of it, right, someone else would have said something, right? You don't imagine someone doing that. What they're saying Ohad did, let's not minimize it, right? They're not saying he penetrated, but they're saying he held somebody down during a violent rape.
And that he listened to the two brothers discuss who's going to go first. I mean, this is like
Right.
Silence of the Lambs.
Exactly.
Or like The Sopranos going to whack someone.
Exactly.
This is you're saying. This is like a beast that 30 years is too little.
Exactly.
This person is going to do that.
Someone who does what they're claiming this third guy did is an extremely violent, sadistic person. To sit there and hold someone down physically while they're being brutally raped. And if someone does that, you would imagine that's not the first, or that's not the only time they would do that. You don't just randomly rape someone, never do it before, never do it again. So going back to who Ohad is, Ohad's the guy who, despite that one charge, that one allegation, which he's now been exonerated of, no one else said anything. And when we saw that no one else ever said a word, that just kept corroborating and confirming to us that this is a wrongful prosecution. He's innocent, right? And of course, we're happy, we're elated that this was dismissed yesterday. It's a huge relief for Ohad and for us. But, everything comes with a price. And the price here is that this is how prosecutors get away with what they do. They get away with things because when they take you down to the wire, they see if you're going to blink. They see if you're going to ask for more time. They see if you're going to take a plea. And then when you don't do that, they dismiss the case, sweep it under the rug, release a 2-page dry press release, and try to move on and never have to answer for how we even got here, right? The lead detective, what he did and didn't do will never come to light other than interviews like this. The fact that they ignored so many inconsistencies would never come to light. So they get away with it. This is how they get away with doing these things over and over again. They dismiss it, they give you a win, and then nobody finds out. The community doesn't find out who their elected officials are and what they're doing.
And I'll add 2 points here. One, vis-a-vis the Alexander brothers, and I'm not going to ask you guys to comment on that. You're not the attorneys for the Alexander brothers, and I don't want you to speculate on this. The fact that you now have someone who clearly fabricated a story undermines much of what's being alleged against them in other jurisdictions and also in this case, because just the fact that you have someone who the police took seriously without really investigating, it creates a big cloud as to what is the actual investigation that's going on and what's the role of a Morgan & Morgan or civil attorneys that are that are getting involved in this stuff, and how is that impacting the investigation? Are they getting a fair shake? These are real questions you have to ask. And Nora, I'm going to turn to you here. You mentioned something, and again, not to disclose all your trial strategies, but clearly in 2025, about a decade or almost a decade after Me Too, there's a lot of sensitivity specifically around sexual crimes. And there are, just as a matter of fact, certain things that if Juan or I said them, it's different than if a woman says it. And when you're having those conversations, how does that cloud of Me Too impact the conversation around these things and how it actually goes about? Because I'll just say for me, when I wrote that people should apologize to Ohad Fisherman, I got all these messages saying you're standing up for horrible people and people that are terrible, and you're a man, you don't understand what this is like. How are you supposed to have a conversation about these kinds of issues in a way that actually gives true victims the chance to pursue justice and have a case brought, and also the accused to have a fair shake, and if they did do it, face real punishment?
Yeah, I think that is, I think it's a difficult thing to address. And I think sort of what comes down to the root of all of it is bad work by the police, right? We have an example here with Ohad where, because of the publicity, the police, and I'm talking about the actual police as well as the prosecution, sort of everything that's the government's involvement in this, was terribly handled for the purpose of the publicity and getting again on this bandwagon with the Alexander brothers. And that shouldn't happen, because you do have people like the accuser in this case who are going to take advantage of people who have money or perceived to have money and do this out of self-interest. And especially if there's a lawsuit already happening, join a bandwagon. So that's bad action on the part of the police. But also, and letting this go forward in what is a terrible story, so that you have somebody who's making a claim about sexual assault falsely, it gets publicized and then it goes away. And I think that is a problem for people, because sexual assault does occur, it does exist. And you actually do have a large number of people who are afraid to report it. They're afraid to report it because at the same time, when it doesn't lead to great publicity for the prosecutor's office, they tend to be very bad about prosecuting those. You know, we know in many jurisdictions, there are rape kits that go untested. We know in many jurisdictions, you have police who don't take actual victims seriously. So I think this case is sad for a couple of reasons, right? All of the horrible treatment of Ohad, but also having somebody come forward who is lying, and the police lending credibility to that, and us ending up in this situation where the dismissal is correct because Ohad Fisherman did not commit a crime. Frankly, I don't believe a sexual assault happened on that New Year's Eve, not just for Ohad at all. And it makes it all the more difficult for actual victims to come forward. So I think it's a problem. I think in terms of Me Too, you know, it's changed the landscape to some extent, but then maybe it hasn't. You know, we just had the big case out of the Southern District of New York, you know? Diddy was just exonerated. So I think the pendulum sort of swings back and forth on it a little bit, and you have to look at it a case-by-case basis, and you really need to start by training the police better. It needs to be a place where actual victims can go and report their assaults and be treated with respect. And it also has to be a place where the police who are taking in those stories know how to assess them. Oh, you're coming in with a civil attorney next to you? You're coming in with a civil attorney from Morgan & Morgan who you retained 4 months ago, who's interjecting in your report about what actually happened. You're making this report about individuals who, if I do a quick Google search, are doing very well and have a lot of money. That should set off a red flag. That should tell the police to do a little bit more work before they just turn around and make an accusation.
Juan, what advice do you have to men as they're going about their lives or going to a social scene in terms of protecting themselves in a case like this? Because it's not even, hey, this person had a consensual encounter with someone. They literally did not meet them. They were proven to be in a different location. So if you're a man in their 20s or early 30s or whatever age, how do you prevent yourself from potentially getting accused in the way that Ohad Fisherman got accused?
You know, that's a good question. And I'm not sure I actually have a good answer for that. We've actually had that conversation. We've talked about it a lot. Like what are parents supposed to tell their sons, right? I've talked to that with my friends who have sons. I have a daughter. But I've talked to that with my friends who have sons, and I don't know, because if it was this easy, where you can just say, Daniel Mael raped me, that's it. And they're going to just arrest you, charge you, perp walk you, and then figure it out. It's scary. I actually don't know what the advice is. In theory, you could say never be alone in a room with a woman, but that's not even it.
But it's not even that. He wasn't even in the room. There was not a room. He was on a boat. This is, to me, it's, I've heard of dozens, hundreds of cases of a man or a woman taking it too far. And I'm not saying I understand, but conceptually I can understand how that event takes place, and has to be justice served, and there's an investigation. He was not in a room with this person because there was not a room. So it's like, hey, if you happen to be in the same zip code as someone on New Year's Eve, then you could get accused 8 years later if your friend hooked up with that person.
Maybe the best advice is to keep track of your movements, of your electronics, of your devices, so that you can prove where you are at any given time. That's really how you can best protect yourself, I think, because we're at a point where anyone can say anything, and you can get charged.
I will say, the next best thing, put my number in your phone, and if they accuse you, you call me.
Yeah,
I'll
okay,
show up at
exactly.
the police station.
Absolutely. No, it's to me, it's just frightening. It's just truly frightening for so many people out there because, as we discussed, I want people that actually, God forbid, unfortunately, endure this to be able to pursue a case and be safe. This, sexual assault is a very serious thing. It should not happen. At the same time, I don't understand how in 2025 in America, people can have their reputation destroyed with literally no evidence. And it's one of those things where Ohad is in a service business. So if you have a choice to work between a real estate agent who has a prior history or a real estate agent who doesn't, and you're selling a property that's going to be some of the most consequential money of your life, you're probably going to want to go with the person who doesn't have a shadow. And there's also this misconception between not guilty and innocent, right? O.J. Simpson was not guilty. Okay. Far cry from innocent. Ohad was completely innocent, and there's no deal, right? I saw him say that. There's been I saw people were sending me messages saying, oh, he probably made a deal. He flipped. So did Ohad Fisherman flip on the Alexander brothers?
No deal.
No.
Never. No. There's no
Did
deal.
you ever approach
We weren't even approached. Yeah. We weren't even approached with a plea offer. Forget deal to cooperate. There was never even a plea offer extended. We never even had those discussions. That never even began to happen, ever. There was no deal, no compromise, no contingencies, no anything. It was just a straight dismissal.
And it's crazy how the power of social media and conspiracy really drives a lot of these narratives, because I see a lot of the comments on social media, a lot of the thinking, people say, oh, there must be something there, it must be financial, it must be there. No, the guy was not there. There was a photo that he uploaded. He was on a boat. He was nowhere near there. There's no deal. I'm pretty confident that Ohad would have never accepted a plea because there's nothing to plea.
He would have never accepted one, for sure. Never.
It's wild.
It was never even a discussion.
Juan, do you think is there any change that you anticipate happening in how things are handled under Rundle, or no?
No. She's been in power for 30 plus years. I don't think there's going to be any changes until there's just changes at the top in that office. And look, and it's not just in that office, right? It's the police departments, right? So you look at the Miami Beach police, these detectives, I think, and Nora, correct me if I'm wrong, total of 40 of training in their entire 19-year career. They have absolutely no training at all. So it's not just the state attorney's office. That's a big part of it, but it's our police departments, especially down here in South Florida. These officers are just not trained. They're not trained for it. And, and when you were mentioning can't believe this is happening in 2025. What makes it even more egregious about the fact that it is 2025 is that we now live in an age of electronics, devices, metadata. So even if it was 8 years ago, the police could have done a lot, right, to verify where things were, who was where, things like that, and avoided all of this, right? So that's what makes it even worse. Back in the day, in the late 80s, early 90s, when there wasn't even DNA, someone could just point a finger and, well, I mean, what do we have? But then we had DNA. There's advances in technology where you can corroborate and verify and confirm things. So that's what makes it even worse and even more horrifying that there wasn't even an attempt to do that here.
It's a very scary reality. Again, Ohad Fisherman, amazingly nice person, beloved, was just married. I really hope that people listen to what you guys had to say and give him a second chance, because he really didn't deserve this. It's absolutely crazy.
And I just want people to also consider, Ohad, absolute sweetheart who I love, and phenomenal legal team who had the resources to do the work to figure out a lot of the shady stuff that was happening behind this case. There are a lot of people who may not be the nicest guy in the world, who does not mean they committed a crime. And there are a lot of people who, even if they have public defenders, may not have the resources that Ohad had in this case, where we're working with, 3 different big law firms. Well, 4, because I'm my own law firm. Does not mean that those people committed crimes. When the government has the amount of power that it does to charge people, to give you or withhold evidence you might need, specifically because they didn't bother to go look for it, we have a problem in the criminal justice system. And we have a lot of people sitting in our jails in Miami-Dade County who probably did not do what they're accused of, who legally they can't prove what they're accused of. But when the government has that much power, it is hard to fight back.
Juan, closing thoughts?
We're lucky to be here. I think Ohad is lucky that we got to this point where, we can be this relieved. But like Nora said, Ohad is not an outlier, right? This happens every day around the country, definitely in this county. These lead detectives, that was not their first shoddy investigation, not their last. So I think it's important people understand that when they see these salacious headlines, my favorite is when they say, this so-and-so was in court today and he pled not guilty. That's his right. That's what we always plead, not guilty, right? So people need to kind of understand that when they read these headlines and understand where they're coming from and why they're hearing them or seeing them, and understand that, it's not the people doing these investigations are regular people that make a lot of mistakes and do things incorrectly sometimes. And we just can't take what we see in the press as gospel.
And you also have to consider that it might be paid for by a civil attorney of the plaintiff.
Yes.
So I look forward to seeing how this transpires. And as the non-legal person watching this, I hope there's a way for Ohad to sue some of these people, because he deserves a lot of, it's just unfathomable to me that someone has their reputation dragged in the mud like this.
He deserves his life back for sure.
He deserves his life back, and he deserves to have a clean slate. And you guys really did amazing work. And as Ohad said yesterday, he wouldn't be here without you guys. So you guys should be very proud of what you did. Thanks for coming on and telling the truth about Ohad Fisherman and the state of Florida.
Thank you,
Thanks
Dan.
for having me.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.